Welcome to the Bald Brad Show. On this Sunday episode, I'm going to be breaking down a clip with Vice President Kamala Harris on Meet the Press, calling the Supreme Court justices activists. Folks, this is one you are definitely not going to want to miss. As always, hit that like and subscribe button. With that being said, let's jump right into the clip.
We have some polling that shows confidence in the Supreme Court is at its lowest level that we've measured in over 20 years. How much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court?
I think this is an activist court.
Okay. All right. First of all, I don't know what it is with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Karine Jean-Pierre, the rest of the White House admin on not being able to listen with their ears and answer a question of which was just asked to them. The question was, how much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court? And her response was, I think they're an activist court. I don't know. Honest to God, I can't figure it out still. No clue. But let's kick it off with kind of what he was saying at the beginning here before we continue, of which he's saying it's the lowest numbers that they've seen and that they've measured in the last 20 years. Now, through these polls, also known as observational studies, there's a lot of biases that seep into this. And that's kind of the problem that we have with these. And you kind of saw this with Trump v. Hillary when that whole debacle was going on. And if you recall how off the polls were, it's because the responses, as well as of which the questions were being asked, gave a lot of biases that came forward. That could be happening in this study as well. Furthermore, a lot of these studies nowadays that these media companies are doing is they're polling like 1,000 people. And that's supposed to be reflective of the population as a whole. Folks, we have a population of 330 million people roughly, give or take. 1,000 people is not going to be representative of that many people. They need to expand that poll out to make it a lot bigger, to have that sample be a lot bigger, to be reflective of the population as a whole. Take that number that they're presenting here as a grain of salt. Now, you got to love that she's calling the Supreme Court an activist court as well, because anytime something goes against the progressive left or the Democrat Party, they start name calling. Just most recently, you had Joe Biden coming out during a speech calling Republicans and conservatives a threat to democracy, a threat to the country. So we're used to this charade. We're used to these shenanigans that they're doing here. And now she's calling the Supreme Court activists because they're not going with their agenda.
What does that mean?
It means that we had an established right for almost half a century, which is the right of women to make decisions about their own body as an extension of what we have decided to be the privacy rights to which all people are entitled.
Okay, I want to pause it there because she's actually being very manipulative here without you maybe even knowing it. And you have to have kind of some prior understanding to kind of catch what she's doing here. She's correlating Griswold v. Connecticut, which was about contraceptives, basically Plan B, and having marital couples have the right to be able to utilize contraceptives in the state of Connecticut, which was illegal back then. So they got it up to the Supreme Court. And that kind of paved the way for Roe v. Wade, of which she's talking about here as well, in terms of taking away a right of a woman to be able to choose to have an abortion. So Griswold v. Connecticut definitely paved that way there of Roe v. Wade, of which there was rights granted both in Griswold v. Connecticut as well as Roe v. Wade that never existed in the first place. Griswold v. Connecticut, the Supreme Court called it a zone of privacy. And of what she's talking about here is they flipped it in the same Supreme Court case in the language and the wording to being a right to privacy, to be able to have contraceptives for marital couples, which again, if you think about just contraceptives for marital couples, has nothing to do with abortions in the first place. But we'll continue.
And this court took that constitutional right away. And we are suffering as a nation because of it.
Taking that right away. So you have to have the prior understanding of Griswold v. Connecticut to get to this understanding of what she's talking about here. The Supreme Court justices literally created a right from the Bill of Rights. They found that it casted these emanations and penumbras. In other words, they call them the shadows. And within those shadows, you can find newly found rights. These newly found rights they've created pre-alluded, like no legislature had ever even thought of it, never found it. You can't find it in the Constitution. You can't find it in the Declaration of Independence. You couldn't find it anywhere. They literally created it out of whole cloth. So much so that literally even abortionists agree that they literally created it out of nowhere. The own clerks of the time of the Supreme Court, of which we have these cases, literally agree with that as well. So it's not like a misunderstanding here. What she's doing is manipulating you into making it think like these rights were taken away as if they existed when the founding fathers created this country in the first place and kind of unraveled there. Give you perspective, these rights of which she's talking about somehow eluded our founders and legislatures for like 176 plus years. So they never existed. The reason why they never existed is the reason why the Supreme Court of our current time removed it. It was never there in the first place and should have never been there. If you want it there, put it there then. Don't blame the Supreme Court for doing their job.
That causes me great concern about the integrity of the court overall, especially as someone who my life was inspired by people like Thurgood Marshall, the work on that court of Earl Warren, to bring a unanimous court to pass Brown v. Board of Education. This is the court that once sat Earl Warren and Thurgood Marshall. Sandra Day O'Connor. It's a very different court.
So she's going to talk about the integrity of the court and then proceed to highlight these other Supreme Court cases. And by the way, her logic is not linear. Let me explain. Is she's talking about the integrity of the court now as if there was never integrity problems in the first place with Supreme Court justices ruling poorly and having to be overturned or should have been overturned, i.e. you had Dred Scott v. Sanford, Plessy v. Ferguson, Karamazov v. United States in 1944. You had a lot of bad decisions that happened in the past that should have never happened in the first place, but they did. Another example, Roe v. Wade. Should never happen in the first place. Those rights never existed. And by the way, you don't have to be somebody of faith. Even if you're somebody that's pro-choice, as I used to be, you can't agree with Roe v. Wade. Literally, the Supreme Court acted as a legislature, even though the judiciary, in creating certain mechanisms of which you have a right to an abortion in terms of which trimester you can obtain one. That's not their job. Their job's not to do that, but they did it anyways. Even on those grounds, it should have been thrown out. So her here cherry picking and not having her logic be linear is very manipulative because you have to have prior understanding of the deep Supreme Court cases of Griswold v. Connecticut and how that paved the way to Roe v. Wade, of which why Roe v. Wade is not just wrong on a faith-based system, but also on a secular system, as well as the way our government works in the first place. But none of that's going to be highlighted here because she has an agenda. And if you go against that agenda, you're a threat to democracy. You're a threat to the country. You're a threat to the establishment. And not only are you a threat, but just as Phil Wegman asked the other week to Karine Jean-Pierre regarding would the Supreme Court justices be extremists for the ruling on Roe v. Wade? And her answer was in a nutshell, yes. And you basically have the same answer being given here, saying it's an activist court. This is wrong. It's dangerous. It's disgusting. And just because somebody doesn't rule your way doesn't mean that they are extremists, doesn't mean they're a threat to democracy, and doesn't mean that they're activists either. As always, folks, hit that like and subscribe button, share this with your friends and family, and I will see you on another episode here tomorrow on The Paul Brad Show.